My sister-in-law spent 2 years trying to destroy my marriage because she wanted her best friend to be my husband's wife instead of me. What she doesn't know is that I own the place she's living in. She started small, forgetting to invite me to family dinners, telling me the wrong time for birthday parties, cropping me out of photos she posted online. "Sorry, must have slipped my mind," she'd say with that fake smile. I tried talking to my husband Ryan about it, but he always defended her. "She's just protective. We're really close. Give her time." The thing about Natalie was she knew exactly how to work him. She'd been manipulating him since they were kids. She'd cry about how I was changing him, how he never spent time with family anymore, how I was isolating him. None of it was true, but she was good at the tears. Then her best friend Ashley moved back to town after her divorce. Suddenly Ashley was at every family event, sitting next to Ryan, laughing at his stories. Bringing his favorite beer, Natalie would seat us at opposite ends of the table, put Ashley right beside him. "Ashley's having such a hard time," Natalie would say. "Ryan, you should help her fix her car. You're so good with those things." And he'd go, because he was helpful like that. Natalie would text me the wrong address for restaurants, then act shocked when I showed up late to find Ashley in my seat. "We didn't think you were coming, so Ashley sat down. You don't mind, right?" She'd invite Ashley to stay at their mother's house during holidays when we visited, knowing there weren't enough bedrooms, suggesting Ryan and Ashley could share the pull-out couch while I took the uncomfortable armchair. "It just makes sense space-wise," she'd say. The worst part was how calculated it all was. She never did anything obvious enough for Ryan to see it. When I'd bring it up, she'd twisted everything. "I'm trying so hard to include you, but you're always so negative. Maybe if you were friendlier, warmer, more like family." She'd say this in front of everyone, making me look like the difficult one. The breaking point came last Christmas. Natalie planned a huge family trip, told everyone except me it was happening. When I found out 2 days before, she said, "Oh, I thought Ryan told you." "Well, there's no more room in the cabin now. Ashley's coming since she's alone for the holidays. But you understand, right? Ryan went without me." Posted pictures of them all by the fireplace, Ashley wearing the Christmas sweater his mom bought her, the same mom who still called me Ryan's wife after 6 years, never my actual name. When he came back, I was done. Not because I thought he cheated. He didn't. But because he couldn't see what was happening, wouldn't believe me over his sister, chose them every single time. "If you can't see how she's destroying us, then maybe we shouldn't be together," I told him. He said I was being paranoid, jealous, controlling. So we divorced. Quick, clean, no fighting over assets. He kept his retirement, I kept mine. He got the house his parents helped with. I got our investments. We both cried signing the papers. "I still love you," he said. "I love you too," I said. "But love isn't enough when your family is actively against us." Natalie was thrilled. She helped him move out, organized a fresh start party, invited Ashley, of course. She even moved into the luxury apartment downtown to be closer to him, help him through the divorce, she said. The 1,200 square foot apartment with the doorman and rooftop pool. She posted pictures constantly. "So blessed to have this space. Living my best life." Sometimes good things come from bad situations. She had no idea that apartment was part of my investment portfolio. I'd bought it 5 years ago, before I even met Ryan. It was in my company's name, managed by a property firm. Natalie never asked who owned it, just saw it online and applied. The property manager didn't know she was my sister-in-law. Why would they? Different last names, no connection. She'd been living there 8 months when she threw Ryan and Ashley's engagement party. Yeah, they got engaged. Natalie's dream come true. She posted about hosting it in her beautiful apartment. How perfect everything was. How Ashley was the sister she'd always wanted. I waited until the week after the party to show up. Told the doorman I was there for a property inspection. He let me right up. I had all the documentation. Natalie answered in her yoga clothes, wine glass in hand at 2 in the afternoon. Her face when she saw me was priceless. "What are you doing here?" "Property inspection," I said, walking past her. "I need to check for damages, review the unit. You can't just barge in here. I have rights. Actually, as the owner, I have the right to inspect with proper notice, which was sent last week." I pulled out the paperwork. Her face went white. She grabbed for the papers, but I held them back. I walked past her into the living room and started taking photos with my phone. The apartment looked different from the listing photos. She'd painted one wall dark gray without permission. I documented that. She followed me around, talking fast about how she didn't know, how this was crazy, how we were family. I moved to the kitchen and found she'd replaced the cabinet hardware with expensive brass pulls. More photos. The granite countertop had a crack near the stove that wasn't in the move-in inspection report. I wrote notes on my tablet while she kept saying she'd been the perfect tenant, always paid on time, never caused problems. I agreed with her about the rent payments. My property management company had no complaints about that, but the lease was clear about modifications. She needed written approval for any changes. She didn't have it. I moved to the bedroom and found scuff marks on the hardwood floors, probably from moving furniture for that engagement party. The bathroom had a new shower curtain rod installed, drilled right into the tile. I photographed everything. She was getting louder now, saying I had no right to do this, that I was harassing her. I pulled out the inspection notice from my folder. It had been sent to her email and mailed to the apartment 10 days ago. She went quiet. I finished documenting the second bedroom she used as an office. Then I told her I'd seen enough. The violations would be reported to the property management company through normal channels. She asked what that meant. I explained that unauthorized modifications and evidence of overcrowding from the party were lease violations. The management company would send her an official notice. She'd have 30 days to fix the issues or face penalties. Her hands were shaking harder now. She asked if I was going to evict her. I said that wasn't my decision to make. The property management company handled all tenant relations. If she corrected the violations within 30 days, there wouldn't be a problem. She started crying then, the same tears she'd used on Ryan for years. I packed up my tablet and folder. She followed me to the door, asking if we could talk about this, work something out between us. I told her everything would go through proper channels. She was a tenant, I was the property owner, and the management company would handle all communication. I left her standing in the doorway and took the elevator down. I sat in my car in the parking garage and called Waverly. She answered on the second ring. I explained that I'd just done an inspection at Unit 407 and discovered the tenant was my former sister-in-law. Waverly was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if that was going to be a problem. I said no, that I wanted everything handled exactly by the book. No special treatment either way. I walked her through what I'd found. The unauthorized paint, the cabinet hardware, the shower rod installation, the floor damage and signs of the party that exceeded occupancy limits. Waverly took notes. She said she'd prepare the standard violation notice and send it within 48 hours. I asked her to document everything carefully. If Natalie tried to claim harassment or discrimination, I wanted a paper trail showing she was treated like any other tenant. Waverly understood she'd been managing properties for 15 years. She knew how to handle difficult situations. We agreed she'd be the only point of contact for Natalie going forward. I wouldn't interact with her directly about tenancy issues. Waverly would copy me on all official correspondence but handle all communication. I thanked her and ended the call. My phone rang while I was driving home. Ryan's name on the screen. I hadn't heard from him in 4 months, not since the divorce was finalized. I answered. He started yelling before I could say hello. Natalie called him crying about how I'd ambushed her at home, violated her privacy, threatened to evict her. He said I was harassing his family and he'd get a restraining order if I didn't stop. I waited until he ran out of steam. Then I asked if he was finished. He demanded to know what gave me the right to show up at Natalie's apartment. I told him I owned the building. He went silent. I explained that I'd bought that property 5 years ago as an investment, before I even met him. It was in my company's name, managed by a property firm. Natalie applied like any other tenant. The property manager had no idea we were connected. He said that was impossible, too convenient. I told him I'd send him the documentation. He said I was lying. I said fine, check your email in 5 minutes. I pulled over and forwarded him everything from my phone. The original purchase documents from 5 years ago showing the date and my LLC as the buyer. The property management contract. The inspection notice that was sent to Natalie's address last week. I attached photos of the violations I'd found. Then I called him back. He answered but didn't say anything. I could hear him breathing, probably looking at the files I'd sent. I asked if he'd seen enough. He made a sound like he was trying to speak but couldn't. I told him this was a legitimate business matter. I owned the property. Natalie was a tenant. She had lease violations that needed to be addressed. Everything was handled through the property management company according to standard procedures. He finally spoke, asking why I never mentioned owning that building. I said it never came up. We were married. I had multiple investment properties. He never asked about my portfolio. He went quiet again. I told him the management company would send Natalie an official notice. If she corrected the violations, there wouldn't be a problem. If he had questions, he could contact them directly. Then I ended the call. 2 days later, Waverly called to say she'd sent the official notice to Natalie. It listed all the violations with photos and gave her 30 days to remedy them, or face penalties up to and including lease termination. The notice was identical to what any tenant would receive. Waverly said Natalie had already called the office 3 times. She kept demanding to speak to the real owner, insisting the LLC structure was fake. Waverly explained that many property owners use business entities. Natalie didn't believe her. She wanted my personal contact information. Waverly refused, citing company policy. All tenant communication went through the management office. Natalie threatened to sue. Waverly calmly told her she had every right to seek legal counsel, but the violations were documented and the notice was valid. Natalie hung up on her. I thanked Waverly for handling it professionally. She said it was actually easier than some tenant situations she'd dealt with. At least Natalie was just angry, not dangerous. My assistant buzzed me 3 days later saying someone was here to see me without an appointment. I asked who. She said a woman named Natalie. I told her to send Natalie in. She walked into my office looking different. No yoga clothes this time. She wore a dress and heels, had done her makeup carefully. She smiled and asked if we could talk. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat down and started with an apology. She said she'd been thinking about how she treated me during my marriage to Ryan. She realized she'd been protective to the point of being hurtful. She wanted to start fresh, move forward as family. I listened without responding. She kept talking, saying she understood now that I'd always cared about Ryan. She'd been wrong to push me away. Maybe we could have coffee sometime, really get to know each other. Her eyes were watching my face, calculating. I recognized that look. She was trying to find the angle that would work on me. I told her that our relationship now was landlord and tenant. It would remain professional and be handled entirely through the property management company. She blinked. Her smile got tighter. She shifted tactics, leaning forward and saying she knew I was hurt about what happened with the marriage. She understood, but she hoped I wouldn't take it out on her by making her housing situation difficult. I said the lease violations were documented facts. She needed to address them according to the notice. That was all. She started crying then. Real tears this time. Or at least better fake ones than usual. She talked about how hard everything had been since her divorce. How much she loved that apartment. How she couldn't afford to move. How she'd fix everything. She just needed me to understand her situation. I waited until she finished. Then I explained that complying with her lease terms was all that was required. The property management company would work with her on the timeline if needed, but everything had to go through them. She wiped her eyes and asked if we could please just handle this between us. I said no. She left without another word. My phone rang that afternoon. Unknown number. I answered and heard a woman's voice asking if this was Ryan's ex-wife. I said yes. She introduced herself as Thea, Ryan's aunt. I remembered her vaguely from a few family gatherings. We'd barely spoken during my marriage. She said she'd heard what happened with Natalie in the apartment. She wanted to meet for coffee if I was willing. I asked why. She said there were things about the family I should know, things she should have told me years ago. I was curious enough to agree. We set a time for the next day at a coffee shop downtown. She thanked me and said she was glad I'd finally see the truth about Natalie. I showed up at the coffee shop the next afternoon. Thea was already there, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups in front of her. She waved me over and slid one across the table. She looked tired, older than I remembered from those few family gatherings. She started talking before I even sat down fully. She said Natalie learned how to control people when she was 12, right after their father left. Amelie fell apart after the divorce and leaned on Natalie for everything. Natalie figured out fast that she could manage her mother's emotions, could make Amelie do whatever she wanted by crying or playing victim. Ryan was only 6 then, and Natalie treated him like her personal project. She'd tell him what to think, who to trust, how to feel about things. By the time he was a teenager, he couldn't make a decision without checking with her first. Thea watched it happen and tried to say something to Amelie, but Amelie shut her out completely. The family closed ranks around Natalie's version of reality. Thea apologized then, said she should have spoken up during my marriage. She thought I seemed strong enough to handle Natalie on my own. And I took a sip of coffee and told her I didn't need strength back then. I needed someone to back me up. Support would have mattered more than explanations now. She nodded and looked down at her cup. Then she told me something that made my stomach drop. Natalie had done this exact same thing to 3 other women Ryan dated seriously. 3 relationships before me, all destroyed the same way. She'd position herself between Ryan and whoever he was dating, manufacture conflicts, play the protective sister card. One girl lasted 2 years before she couldn't take it anymore. Another one actually tried to set boundaries with Natalie and got frozen out by the whole family. The third one saw what was happening early and left before it got too bad. Thea had watched the pattern repeat over and over, and nobody else in the family seemed to notice or care. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos from years ago, pictures of Ryan with these other women at family events. In every single one, Natalie was right there, inserted into the frame, her arm around Ryan or her hand on his shoulder. The girlfriends were always on the edges, cut off or pushed to the side. It was like looking at my own marriage in reverse. Thea said she'd testify to all of this if I ever needed a witness. The intensity in her voice surprised me. She really wanted Natalie held accountable for something. Anything. I thanked her and left the coffee shop feeling like I understood the family dynamics for the first time. This wasn't just about me or Ashley. This was a pattern decades in the making. My phone rang 3 days later while I was reviewing property reports. Waverly's name showed on the screen. She told me Natalie had corrected every single lease violation within the 30-day window. The kitchen modifications were reversed by a licensed contractor. She'd submitted documentation proving the party didn't exceed occupancy limits after all. Everything was now in full compliance. I felt impressed despite myself. Natalie was smart enough not to give me any ammunition to use against her. The professional distance I'd maintained was working exactly as intended. Everything stayed documented and legal, no personal drama mixed into business decisions. Waverly said Natalie had been almost pleasant during the final inspection, cooperative and polite. I told Waverly to keep following standard procedures for everything. She agreed and hung up. A message popped up on my social media that evening. Ashley's profile picture showed up in my message requests. She asked if we could meet in person without Ryan or Natalie knowing. I stared at the message for a full minute. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity won out. I suggested a coffee shop across town, far from anywhere the family would go. She responded immediately. Thanking me and asking if tomorrow worked, I agreed and put my phone down, wondering what she could possibly want to tell me. She walked into the coffee shop looking nervous, her eyes scanning the room before she spotted me. I waved her over and she slid into the booth across from me. Up close, I realized she was younger than I'd thought, maybe 25 to my 32. She had that fresh-faced look that made me understand why Natalie chose her. Easy to mold, easy to control. She ordered a tea and fidgeted with the menu while we waited. Then she started talking. She said she never wanted to come between Ryan and me. Natalie orchestrated the whole thing from the start. Ashley had just gotten divorced and moved back to town with no friends and no support system. Natalie befriended her immediately, invited her to everything, made her feel included. Then Natalie started mentioning her brother constantly, how great he was, how he needed someone kind and warm in his life. Ashley went along with it because Natalie was her only friend. She pulled out her phone and showed me text messages. Months of messages from Natalie coaching her on what to say to Ryan, how to act around him, what to wear to family events. Specific instructions about laughing at his jokes, asking about his work, bringing his favorite beer. I scrolled through them and felt sick. It was the same manipulation that had been used on me, just from a different angle. Natalie had been playing puppet master with both of us. I asked Ashley why she was showing me this now. She set her phone down and her hands were shaking slightly. She admitted she was scared of marrying into this family. Natalie had become more controlling as the wedding got closer. She was dictating every detail of the wedding plans, insisting they all needed to live near each other after the marriage, calling Ashley multiple times a day to check in. Ashley realized she wasn't gaining a husband. She was absorbed into Natalie's control system. She'd be another person Natalie managed and manipulated. The wedding was supposed to be in 4 months and Ashley was having panic attacks about it. She begged me not to tell Ryan about our meeting. She said Natalie would destroy her if she found out. I didn't promise anything, but I told her I understood her situation better than she probably realized. She was another victim of Natalie's manipulation, just one who happened to benefit from it at first. Now she was seeing the cost of that benefit. I felt unexpected sympathy for her. She wasn't the enemy I'd thought she was. She was just young and lonely and got caught in Natalie's web like everyone else. We finished our drinks and she left first, checking over her shoulder like she expected Natalie to appear. I called Emily Walton the next morning. She was a tenant rights attorney someone had recommended months ago when I first expanded my property portfolio. I needed to make sure I was handling everything with Natalie legally and ethically. Emily had me come to her office that afternoon. I brought all my documentation, every inspection report, every communication with Waverly, every notice sent to Natalie. Emily spread it all out on her conference table and went through each piece carefully. After an hour, she looked up and told me I'd been completely appropriate in my role as landlord. Everything followed standard procedures exactly. She advised me to maintain the professional distance and never let personal history influence any business decisions. I assured her that was exactly what I'd been doing. Everything went through Waverly. Everything was documented. Everything was by the book. Emily warned me that Natalie could potentially sue for harassment or discrimination if I treated her differently than other tenants. Even the appearance of personal motivation could cause legal problems. I told her that everything went through the property management company and followed their standard procedures exactly. I'd never given Natalie special treatment, good or bad. She was just another tenant in my building. Emily seemed satisfied but told me to document every single interaction meticulously going forward. Save every email, every call log, every inspection report. If Natalie ever tried to claim harassment, I'd need proof that everything was handled professionally. I thanked her and left feeling more confident about my approach. My accountant Gavin called that week about the quarterly review of my property portfolio. We went through each building's performance, discussing occupancy rates and maintenance costs. When we got to the downtown building, Gavin mentioned that Natalie's rent payments had been consistently on time every single month. She was actually a model tenant financially. Never late, never bouncing checks, never causing problems with payments. I realized that despite everything personal between us, she was giving me no legitimate business reason for complaint. She paid her rent. She followed her lease terms. She maintained the apartment properly. As a landlord, I couldn't ask for better. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who destroyed my marriage was now my most reliable tenant. 3 days later, Ryan showed up at my office without calling first. My assistant buzzed me saying someone was here to see me, and when I walked out to the lobby, there he was. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled shirt like he'd slept in it. He asked if we could talk about what really happened to our marriage. Thea had told him some things that made him question everything he thought he knew. I didn't want to rehash old pain, didn't see the point of going over everything again, but something in his face, the way he looked lost and tired, made me agree to dinner that evening. He left and I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, wondering what Thea had said to him. That evening we met at a quiet restaurant across town, the kind of place where tables were far enough apart for private conversations. Ryan ordered a beer, I got wine, and we sat in awkward silence for a minute before he started talking. He'd been thinking a lot since finding out I owned Natalie's building. The coincidence had made him look at other things differently, made him question what else he'd missed. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling, then turned it toward me. Text messages from Natalie. Dozens of them over the past 6 months. I leaned closer and read them. Messages celebrating that I wasn't at family dinners anymore. Messages about how much better everything was without me there. Detailed plans about seating arrangements to put Ashley next to Ryan. Strategy sessions about topics Ashley should bring up. Stories she should tell. It was all there, written out in Natalie's own words. Proof of everything I'd tried to tell him during our marriage. Ryan's hands shook as he scrolled through more messages. His face looked crushed, like he was seeing his sister for the first time. He kept saying he couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe he'd been so blind. I watched him process what I'd been trying to show him for years. He apologized then. Really apologized. Not the defensive sorry he'd given during our marriage when I complained about Natalie, but a real apology that acknowledged what he'd done wrong. He said he was sorry for not believing me, for choosing his sister over his wife, for letting Natalie destroy what we had. He looked at me across the table and asked if there was any chance for us, any way to fix this. I appreciated the apology. I really did. It felt good to finally be heard and believed. But I told him the truth, that it was too late. Some things break so completely they can't be put back together. He was engaged to someone else now, building a life with Ashley. I'd moved on too, built a new life without him. He nodded slowly, accepting my answer even though I could see it hurt. Then I told him about my conversation with Ashley, about her concerns regarding Natalie's control over their relationship. He sat back in his chair looking surprised. He admitted he'd noticed Ashley getting quieter as the wedding got closer, more anxious and withdrawn. She'd stopped making decisions about the wedding, just agreed with whatever Natalie suggested. I suggested he talk to Ashley honestly about what kind of marriage they wanted, separate from his sister's input. He needed to figure out if Ashley was marrying him or marrying into Natalie's plan. We finished dinner and went our separate ways. I drove home feeling strange, like I'd closed a door that had been hanging open for months. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was making coffee. I didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. Natalie's voice came through, high and angry, practically screaming. She knew I'd had dinner with Ryan. How dare I try to destroy her family? I was a bitter ex-wife who couldn't move on. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I was poisoning Ryan against her. She went on and on, her voice getting louder and more unhinged with each accusation. I didn't interrupt, just let her rant until she finally ran out of words. Then I hung up without saying anything and saved the voicemail she'd left earlier that I hadn't listened to yet. It was 3 minutes of similar accusations, even worse than the phone call. I forwarded it to Emily Walton with a brief explanation. Emily called back within an hour saying this was exactly the kind of harassment that justified a cease and desist letter. She'd draft one immediately. Everything had to go through proper channels now. No more direct contact from Natalie. That afternoon, Waverly called with an update. Natalie had shown up at the property management office demanding to break her lease early and move out immediately. Waverly had calmly explained the financial penalties for breaking a lease, showed her the terms she'd signed. Natalie had gotten upset, raising her voice, claiming she was forced out of her home. Waverly had remained professional, explaining that Natalie was welcome to stay through her lease term, or leave according to the terms she'd agreed to. The choice was hers, but the penalties were standard and applied to all tenants equally. I thanked Waverly for handling it so well. After we hung up, I sat at my desk looking at all the documentation I'd accumulated. The inspection reports, the lease violations that had been corrected, the payment history, now the voicemail and Emily's cease and desist letter. I realized Natalie was spiraling because she'd lost control of the story she'd been telling. For the first time in her life, she was facing real consequences that her tears and manipulation couldn't fix. She couldn't cry her way out of a legal lease. She couldn't make me the bad guy when everything was documented and professional. The power balance had flipped completely, and she didn't know how to handle it. Later that week, my phone rang again. This time it was Emily, Ryan's mother. I almost didn't answer because I couldn't imagine why she'd be calling me. She'd never accepted me as Ryan's wife, never even tried. But curiosity won, and I picked up. She started talking immediately, demanding I stop harassing Natalie. Her daughter was upset, couldn't sleep, was forced from her home by my vendetta. If I didn't leave Natalie alone, she'd take legal action. I let her finish her threats, then calmly explained I was a landlord conducting normal business. If she had concerns about the property management, she should contact the company directly. Emily didn't like that answer at all. She started listing everything wrong with me as a wife. I was cold, unfriendly, didn't make enough effort with the family. I never cooked the right foods for holidays. I didn't understand their traditions. I'd isolated Ryan from his family. On and on she went. Every complaint she'd apparently been storing up for 6 years. I let her talk herself out completely, waiting until she finally paused for breath. Then I asked if she was finished. She made a surprised sputtering sound, clearly not expecting me to respond that calmly. I told her that her opinion stopped mattering to me the day the divorce was finalized. Then I ended the call and blocked her number. An hour later, Thea called, laughing so hard she could barely talk. Emily was calling everyone in the family, ranting about my disrespect and rudeness. Thea said it was the best thing she'd ever heard, that someone had finally stood up to Emily's bullying. She invited me to lunch the next week, saying there were things about the family I should know, things that would help me understand why Natalie turned out the way she did. The next week, I met Thea at a small restaurant downtown, one of those places with outdoor seating and good sandwiches. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 iced teas ordered. She stood up and hugged me, which surprised me because we'd never been that close during my marriage. We sat down and made small talk for a few minutes about the weather and the menu, but I could tell she had things she wanted to say. After we ordered, she leaned forward and started talking. She told me that Natalie's manipulation didn't start with me. It went back years to when their father left. Natalie was 12 when he walked out and Emily fell apart completely. She cried all the time, couldn't get out of bed, stopped cooking and cleaning. Natalie stepped in to take care of everything, managing the house and looking after Ryan, who was only 6. But more than that, Natalie learned she could control Emily's emotions. If she was sweet and helpful, Emily felt better. If she pulled back, Emily got worse. It gave Natalie power she'd never had before, and she used it. Ryan became her project after that, someone she could shape and control from the beginning. She'd tell him what to think, who to be friends with, how to act. Emily encouraged it because Natalie was so good at keeping the family together. Thea watched it happen but couldn't stop it. She tried to talk to Emily about giving the kids space to grow up normally, but Emily shut her out for not supporting the family. Thea said she watched Natalie sabotage Ryan's relationships all through high school and college. There was a girl named Jessica in college who Ryan really loved, but Natalie convinced him Jessica was using him for money. Another girl named Maria got the same treatment, with Natalie crying to Ryan about how Maria didn't respect family values. The pattern was always the same. Natalie would find something wrong with every girl, work on Ryan until he believed it, then comfort him through the breakup. She'd been doing it for over 15 years by the time I came along. Thea pulled out her phone and showed me notes she'd been keeping, dates and details of every relationship Natalie had destroyed. She'd documented it all, hoping someone would eventually hold Natalie responsible. I asked Thea why she was telling me this now, after staying quiet through my whole marriage. She said because I was the first person who had actual power to do something about it. By owning Natalie's building, I'd disrupted her sense of control in a way that couldn't be manipulated away. Natalie couldn't cry her way out of a lease or make me the bad guy when everything was legal and documented. Thea saw this as the chance to finally break the toxic pattern that had controlled their family for years. She wanted me to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, that this wasn't just about me or my marriage. It was about decades of manipulation that had hurt everyone in the family. My phone rang while we were finishing lunch. It was Waverly calling with an update. I excused myself and stepped outside to take it. Waverly told me that Natalie had called the office that morning to say she'd be staying through her lease term after all. She wouldn't be breaking the lease early, but she'd already given notice that she wouldn't renew when it expired in 6 months. Waverly said Natalie sounded different on the phone, quieter and less demanding than before. She seemed defeated in a way Waverly hadn't seen in their previous interactions. I thanked Waverly for the update and told her to continue treating Natalie exactly like any other tenant. 6 months of professional landlord-tenant relationship I could handle easily. When I got back to the table, Thea was paying the check. She asked if everything was okay, and I told her about Natalie's decision to stay, but not renew. Thea smiled and said it was probably the first time in Natalie's life she couldn't control the outcome of a situation. 3 days later, Ryan texted me asking if we could meet again. His message said he'd been in therapy and learning about family enmeshment and manipulation. He wanted to talk about what he was discovering. I agreed to meet for coffee, curious about what therapy was teaching him. We met at a coffee shop near his new apartment, and I barely recognized him when he walked in. He looked healthier somehow, his face less stressed and his eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. We got our drinks and sat down, and he started talking immediately. He told me his therapist had given him books to read about enmeshed families and emotional manipulation. Everything he was learning described his relationship with Natalie perfectly. He'd started seeing how she'd controlled him his whole life, making decisions for him disguised as protective concern. The therapy was helping him understand that what he thought was a close sibling bond was actually unhealthy dependence that Natalie had created and maintained. He'd confronted her about some of it, and she'd cried and said he was abandoning the family just like their father did. That manipulation had always worked before, but this time Ryan recognized it for what it was. Ryan told me he'd postponed the wedding indefinitely. He and Ashley needed to figure out their relationship without Natalie's influence hanging over everything. Ashley had moved to her own apartment across town, and they were dating properly for the first time, without Natalie orchestrating every interaction. He was also setting boundaries with his mother, telling her he needed space and wouldn't be attending every family event. Emily was furious about it, calling him selfish and ungrateful. The whole family was in chaos because Ryan was finally standing up for himself. I felt proud of Ryan for doing the work, for finally seeing what I'd tried to show him for years. But I was also clear with him that this didn't change anything between us. Our marriage was over, and his growth now didn't erase the years of pain he'd caused by choosing his sister over me. Ryan nodded and said he understood completely. He wasn't asking for another chance or trying to get back together. He just wanted me to know that he finally saw the truth about what had happened to us. He said he was sorry for all the years he'd dismissed my concerns and made me feel crazy for seeing what was right in front of us. He took responsibility for the divorce, for not protecting our marriage, for letting Natalie destroy what we had. I accepted his apology and told him I hoped he and Ashley could build something healthy together. We finished our coffee and said goodbye, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. 2 days after my meeting with Ryan, I woke up to find a long email from Natalie in my inbox. It was pages of text about how I was destroying her family and ruining her brother's happiness. She accused me of manipulating Ryan against her, of using my position as his landlord to control his life, of being vindictive and cruel. She said I'd never understood their family bond, and I was jealous of how close they were. The email went on, listing every way I'd supposedly wronged her and demanding I leave them all alone. I read it once, then forwarded it to Emily Walton without responding. Emily called me an hour later and said she'd send Natalie a formal cease and desist letter. The email was clearly harassment, and Emily wanted it on record that Natalie needed to stop all direct contact with me. Everything had to go through proper legal or business channels from now on. Emily sent the letter that afternoon, and after that, the direct contact from Natalie finally stopped. I focused on my own life and business, which had been doing really well since the divorce. I'd thrown myself into work during the separation, and it had paid off in ways I hadn't expected. Gavin called for our regular check-in and told me my property portfolio had increased in value by 30% over the past year. The downtown building where Natalie lived was worth significantly more than I'd paid for it, and my other investments were all performing above expectations. Gavin suggested I consider buying another building downtown while the market was good. I told him to send me some options to review. The revenge of living well was proving to be the sweetest kind. I had a successful business, financial security, and peace in my life that I'd never had during my marriage. A week later, Ashley reached out through social media again. She sent me a long message thanking me for talking to Ryan and helping him see the family dynamics clearly. She said their couples counseling was going really well now that Natalie wasn't controlling everything behind the scenes. Ashley seemed genuinely happy in her message, more confident than when I'd met her at the coffee shop. She said Ryan was becoming the person she'd always sensed he could be, and she was grateful I'd pushed back against Natalie's manipulation, even though it had cost me my marriage. She promised they were building something real together now, something based on honest communication, instead of Natalie's orchestration. I read her message and felt genuinely happy for them both. A few weeks later, I attended a property investors networking event downtown, one of those evening mixers with wine and name tags where people talk about market trends and zoning laws. I went mostly for the business connections, but ended up having actual fun conversations with several people who understood the investment side of real estate. One person asked if I wanted to grab drinks after the event ended, and I said yes without overthinking it. We went to a bar nearby and talked for 2 hours about everything except real estate, and when I got home that night, I realized I was actually ready to date again. The divorce had hurt, but I'd healed more than I thought. Life was moving forward in good ways I hadn't expected. Waverly called the next week with her monthly report and mentioned that Natalie had been a model tenant for 3 months straight. No issues, no complaints from neighbors, rent paid early every single time. I asked if Natalie had caused any problems at all, and Waverly said no. Everything was completely professional and clean. I wondered if losing control over the situation had actually forced Natalie to behave better, or if she was just biding her time and planning something. Either way, the professional relationship was working exactly as it should. Natalie was following her lease terms, and I was staying completely out of her personal life. Thea called a few days after that and invited me to a small family gathering she was hosting, making it very clear that Emily and Natalie would not be there. I was surprised but agreed to come. When I arrived at her house that Saturday, I met several of Ryan's extended family members I'd never known during the marriage. The biggest surprise was meeting Ryan's father for the first time. He'd left when Ryan was young, maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I'd always assumed he was completely out of the picture. He was there with his second wife, a kind woman who taught high school math, and he had a completely different perspective on the family dynamics than anyone else I'd talked to. Ryan's father pulled me aside after dinner and apologized for not being present to protect Ryan from Natalie's manipulation growing up. He admitted he left partly because Emily was using the children as emotional weapons during their marriage, and Natalie had learned to do the same thing by watching her mother. He said he tried to maintain contact with both kids after the divorce, but Emily and Natalie made it impossible, poisoning Ryan against him with lies and manipulation. Every visit became a battle. Every phone call ended with Ryan crying and confused, until eventually he just stopped trying because he thought he was hurting Ryan more by staying involved. He said watching Natalie destroy my marriage was like watching history repeat itself, and he felt guilty for not warning me or Ryan about the patterns he'd seen. The gathering gave me closure I didn't know I needed. Understanding that the dysfunction ran much deeper than just Natalie's jealousy or Emily's coldness helped me see the whole picture. This family had been broken for decades, and I'd walked into something that was never going to work no matter how hard I tried. I was grateful I got out when I did, before years more of manipulation and pain. Ryan was there with Ashley, and they seemed genuinely happy together, now that they were building something real without Natalie controlling every interaction. They sat close together and actually talked to each other instead of performing for an audience, and Ashley looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. I started dating the person I met at the networking event, taking things slow but enjoying the connection we were building. They knew about my divorce and the complicated family situation because I was honest from the start, and they were respectful of my boundaries in ways that felt completely different from my marriage. We went to dinner, saw movies, took walks around the city, and everything felt healthy and normal in a way my relationship with Ryan never did. There was no family drama, no hidden manipulation, no walking on eggshells. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing if something good could develop. Waverly called again when Natalie's lease was approaching its end and confirmed that Natalie was moving to a different neighborhood entirely, somewhere across town near her job. I felt relief that the landlord-tenant relationship would end cleanly and professionally. Natalie never caused problems after that initial confrontation in her apartment, which I respected despite our history. She could have made things difficult, but she chose to follow the rules and behave appropriately, and I appreciated that maturity, even though we'd never be friends. Ryan called me on a Tuesday afternoon to tell me he and Ashley had decided not to get married after all, but they were staying together and building a life on their own terms. He said they realized the engagement had been rushed and influenced by Natalie's expectations, and they wanted to figure out their relationship without that pressure. He was maintaining boundaries with Natalie now and had a healthier relationship with his mother after some hard conversations. He sounded genuinely happy and clear-headed in a way I'd never heard during our marriage, like he'd finally figured out who he was separate from his family's control. I realized after that call that owning Natalie's building had turned out to be the catalyst for everyone in that family to face the truth. My unintentional power over her living situation forced her to behave differently, which allowed others to see the manipulation clearly when it wasn't hidden behind perfect performance. Sometimes the universe has a sense of irony that's almost funny. I never planned to own my ex-sister-in-law's apartment, never wanted that kind of power over her life, but it ended up being exactly what everyone needed to see reality. Thea and I started meeting for lunch monthly after that gathering, and we became genuine friends, separate from any connection to Ryan or his family. She was thrilled that Ryan was finally breaking free from the family dysfunction, and kept thanking me for starting the process. I told her Ryan did the work himself, that he made the choice to see the truth and change his patterns. I just happened to own the right building at the right time, and everything else was Ryan's own growth and effort. 3 weeks later, Waverly called me on the morning of Natalie's scheduled move-out. She asked if I wanted to be present for the final inspection, but I declined, telling her to handle it exactly like she would for any other tenant. Waverly texted me updates throughout the day as the movers cleared out furniture and Natalie handed over her keys. The final inspection revealed the apartment in perfect condition, every wall clean, every fixture working, not a single issue to document. Waverly sent photos showing the immaculate state of each room and confirmed that Natalie would receive her full security deposit within the required time frame. Her last text mentioned that Natalie had been professional and cordial during the walkthrough, almost subdued compared to her usual personality. The landlord-tenant relationship ended exactly as it should have, with proper procedures followed and no drama on either side. I felt satisfied that everything had been handled correctly from start to finish. The property management conference in Dallas came 2 months after Natalie moved out, and I flew there feeling more confident than I had in years. Walking through the convention center filled with other investors and property managers, I realized how much I had grown as a business person since the divorce. The panels on portfolio expansion and market analysis made sense in ways they wouldn't have before, and I found myself contributing to discussions with actual expertise. My divorce had forced me to focus completely on my own success, instead of trying to navigate family drama, and I had built something genuinely solid. Gavin met me for dinner after the first day of sessions, and we reviewed my current portfolio numbers over steak and wine. My properties were performing well above projections. My business reputation in the local real estate community was excellent, and my personal life had finally reached a place of peace. I went to bed that night in my hotel room feeling proud of who I had become through all the difficulty. 6 months after Natalie moved out, I was having lunch with Thea at our usual spot downtown when she mentioned that Natalie was in therapy. Thea had heard from a mutual friend that Natalie was actually working on her controlling behaviors and taking responsibility for the damage she had caused. Apparently losing her grip on Ryan and facing consequences she couldn't manipulate away had been a real wake-up call. Thea said Natalie's therapist was helping her understand the patterns that started after their father left, and how she had used control to manage her anxiety about abandonment. I told Thea I hoped the growth was genuine for everyone's sake, that real change would benefit the whole family. Part of me remained skeptical after years of watching Natalie manipulate situations, but I also knew people could change if they truly wanted to. Thea showed me photos on her phone from Ryan and Ashley's wedding the week before, a small ceremony at a garden venue with just close friends attending Natalie, and Amelie hadn't been invited, which Thea said was a huge boundary for Ryan to set after a lifetime of putting his mother and sister first. The photos showed Ryan and Ashley looking genuinely happy and free, holding hands under an arch of flowers, laughing with their small group of guests. Ashley wore a simple white dress, and Ryan had on a gray suit, both of them relaxed in a way I never saw during my marriage to him. Thea said the ceremony had been beautiful and emotional, focused entirely on Ryan and Ashley's commitment to each other without any family drama or manipulation. I felt happy for them in a way I didn't expect, glad they were building something real together. My own relationship had developed into something serious over those same months, and I found myself falling in love again. My partner had healthy relationships with their family, respected boundaries naturally, and communicated openly about everything. We spent weekends exploring the city, cooking dinner together, talking about our goals and dreams without any hidden agendas. The contrast to my marriage with Ryan was so stark it almost felt unreal at first, like I was waiting for the manipulation to start. But it never did because my partner came from a functional family where people said what they meant and respected each other's independence. I felt grateful for the painful experience with Ryan's family because it taught me what healthy relationships should look like. Every dinner with my partner's parents showed me what normal family dynamics felt like. Every boundary they respected reminded me that I deserved better than what I had accepted before Gavin called me 3 months later about the second downtown building I had been considering for over a year. The owner had finally agreed to sell, and the numbers worked even better than our initial projections. I signed the purchase agreement in Gavin's office, expanding my investment portfolio significantly, with a property that would generate strong returns for decades. Gavin was thrilled with how the deal came together, telling me I had excellent instincts for finding undervalued properties in developing neighborhoods. I felt proud of building this success completely independently, creating a business that thrived beyond what I had imagined during those dark months of divorce. The building represented everything I had accomplished by focusing on my own growth instead of trying to fix a broken family dynamic. Thea mentioned during our next lunch that Amelie had finally started questioning her role in the family dysfunction after being excluded from Ryan's wedding. She was apparently in therapy too, working on her enmeshment with Natalie and the ways she had enabled toxic patterns for years. Thea said Amelie's therapist was helping her see how she had used her children to meet her own emotional needs after the divorce, instead of building a healthy adult life. The whole family was slowly healing in ways Thea never expected to see, each person finally taking responsibility for their part in the dysfunction. I told Thea I was glad they were all getting help, that it would benefit everyone, especially Ryan and Ashley, as they built their marriage. Part of me wondered if things could have been different if this healing had happened during my marriage to Ryan, but I also knew the timing hadn't been right. Then I ran into Natalie at a coffee shop completely by accident on a Tuesday morning 3 months later. We both froze when we saw each other, her hand stopping halfway to the cream and sugar station, my feet planted in the doorway. The moment stretched awkwardly as other customers moved around us, ordering drinks and finding tables. Then Natalie walked over to me slowly, her face showing none of the manipulation or fake warmth I remembered. She asked if we could talk for just a minute, and I nodded, curious about what she wanted to say. We stood near the window while she apologized sincerely for everything she had done to destroy my marriage, her voice quiet and steady. She said therapy had helped her see how toxic her behavior had been, how she had hurt everyone around her, including Ryan, by trying to control his life. Natalie took full responsibility without making excuses or trying to justify her actions, admitting she had been cruel and manipulative because of her own issues. I listened to her apology without interrupting, watching her face for signs of the old manipulation, but seeing only genuine remorse. When she finished, I told her I was accepted her apology, but made clear that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation or friendship between us. She nodded immediately, saying she understood, and wasn't asking for anything beyond acknowledgement that she recognized the harm she had caused. We stood there another moment in silence, then said goodbye and went our separate ways. I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected from that brief conversation, like a chapter of my life had finally ended properly. My partner proposed on the rooftop of my downtown building 4 months later, on a clear evening with the city lights spreading out below us. We had gone up there for what I thought was just a casual dinner, the building manager having set up a small table with candles at my partner's request. When they got down on one knee and pulled out a ring, I started laughing at the irony that the property which exposed Natalie's manipulation was now the site of my new beginning. I said yes immediately, pulling them up to kiss me while the city sparkled around us. Life had a funny way of working out, taking the place where everything fell apart and turning it into where everything came together. We stayed on that rooftop for hours, talking about our future and making plans for a life built on honesty and mutual respect. I thought about how far I had come from that day. I showed up at Natalie's door with inspection paperwork, how much I had grown and healed. The building beneath us represented not just financial success, but personal triumph, proof that focusing on my own growth had led me exactly where I needed to be. 3 weeks after the proposal, my phone lit up with Ryan's name for the first time in months. I stared at it for a moment before answering, wondering what he could possibly want now. His voice came through warm and genuine, congratulating me on the engagement because Thea had told him the news. He said he was really happy for me, that I deserved someone who appreciated me fully and put me first. There wasn't any bitterness or resentment in his tone, just honest happiness for my new chapter. He told me he'd been working hard in therapy and finally understood how badly he'd failed me during our marriage. I thanked him for calling and told him I appreciated how much he'd grown since the divorce. We kept it brief and cordial, ending the call on good terms, and I felt grateful that he'd reached that point of genuine self-awareness. It was the closure I hadn't realized I still needed from him. The wedding planning started immediately after that call, and I threw myself into it with pure excitement. My partner and I met with vendors, toured venues, and made decisions together with equal input and enthusiasm. Their family welcomed me completely, inviting me to dinners and including me in conversations without any of the manipulation or exclusion I'd experienced with Ryan's family. Their mother learned my coffee order after one visit and always had my favorite pastries ready when I came over. Their sister asked genuine questions about my business and actually listened to the answers instead of looking for ways to undermine me. The contrast between this warm, healthy family dynamic and what I'd endured with Amelie and Natalie made me appreciate my new life even more. Every planning session felt joyful instead of stressful, because everyone involved actually wanted to celebrate our happiness. My partner's parents offered to help with costs, but respected our boundaries when we said we wanted to handle it ourselves. Nobody tried to take over the planning or push their own vision onto our wedding. Thea called asking if she could help with the wedding planning, and I immediately said yes. She showed up to our next planning meeting with a notebook full of ideas and vendor recommendations from her own daughter's wedding years ago. We spent hours together going through details, and she became an invaluable part of the process. One afternoon, while we were addressing invitations, she joked that she was finally getting to celebrate a wedding in her family that wasn't built on manipulation and control. I laughed and told her she was family to me now, regardless of my divorce from Ryan. She got teary and hugged me, saying she'd always hoped I'd stay in her life somehow. Thea helped me choose flowers, gave honest opinions on dress options, and even hosted my bridal shower at her house. She told stories about watching Ryan grow up and admitted she'd always known Natalie's behavior was toxic, but hadn't known how to stop it. I appreciated her honesty and her genuine support during this happy time. The wedding day arrived on a perfect Saturday in June with clear skies and warm sunshine. I stood in the bridal suite surrounded by friends who'd supported me through the divorce and this new relationship, all of them helping with final touches and keeping me calm. My partner's family filled the venue with laughter and love, creating an atmosphere of pure celebration. Thea sat in the front row beaming with pride, and even my own parents looked happier than I'd ever seen them at my first wedding. As I walked down the aisle toward my partner, I realized that Natalie's attempts to destroy my first marriage had actually pushed me toward this better life. I owned a successful property business that kept growing. I had real friendships with people who genuinely cared about me, and I was marrying someone who valued me completely and put our relationship first. The revenge of living well wasn't just a saying, it was my actual reality now. Everything I'd built since the divorce, from my thriving business to these authentic relationships, proved that sometimes the best response to manipulation is simply succeeding without the manipulators in your life. And that's where we'll stop. I like when stories remind us of small things that still matter. If it helped you reflect or learn something, that's what counts.